Stop the music, now! Margaret Hale's voice cracked through the megaphone like thunder splitting the air. The rhythm of drums stuttered, then fell into silence. Laughter turned to murmurs. Children froze mid-dance as the summer air thickened with confusion. Rows of tents lined the cul-de-sac, filled with the scent of barbecue and sweet corn. Banners reading Carter Heritage Festival, 101 years strong. But the cheer that had filled the afternoon now wavered under the weight of Margaret's command. Effective immediately. "This event is in violation of community regulations," she barked, her polished shoes crunching gravel as she strode forward. 2 other HOA members followed, clutching clipboards and phones raised high, recording every angle of the stunned crowd. Noise levels exceed the limit. "Unregistered vendors. Unauthorized street closure," one of them recited. As if reading a police report instead of addressing neighbors, police officers stood off to the side, uncertain, hands hovering near their belts, glancing between the HOA and the gathering crowd. A woman holding a plate of ribs whispered, "They're really doing this again?" At the center of it all stood Elias Carter, mid-40s, tall but unassuming, a man whose calm presence felt almost out of place amid the tension. The volunteer badge on his chest read Festival Coordinator. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his hands dusty from helping set up chairs earlier that morning. Margaret's gaze locked onto him. "You're responsible for this?" she snapped. Elias stepped forward, voice even. "Yes, ma'am. My name's Elias Carter. This event," she interrupted, "is a disruption to property values and community peace. You can't just bring in outsiders and block the street like this." He offered her a folder, its edges worn from years of use. "We've submitted the permits to the township, same as every year." "You're welcome to look," she waved it away like dust. "Those aren't HOA documents. They don't apply here." Her words cut through the murmuring crowd. Somewhere behind, a child began to cry. Elias turned instinctively, not toward Margaret, but toward the sound. A little girl's balloon had slipped free and tangled in the gravel, deflating. Elias crouched down, gently untangling the ribbon, handing it back with a soft smile. "There you go, sweetheart," he whispered. The act was small, almost invisible amid the noise. But it lingered, a moment of quiet humanity against the sharpness of authority. Margaret's tone hardened. "You need to shut this down before we issue formal citations. Property owners are already complaining." A few voices rose from the crowd. "Complaining about what?" one man called out. "We've done this every year since before you moved here." Older residents murmured in agreement, faces lined with memory and fatigue. "This street was dancing long before the HOA," one woman said under her breath. Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "This festival honors the families who built this town," he said softly. "That history deserves respect." Margaret lifted her phone higher, recording his face. "History doesn't exempt you from the rules." The camera of the story would linger here, the tension between silence and dignity, between the right to celebrate and the hunger to control. The drums sat motionless, hands frozen above them, the air waiting for something deeper than permission. And as the crowd watched Elias stand beneath the faded festival banner, calm, steady, unbroken, the narration slipped in like a breath. What they called disturbance was the sound of remembrance, and some memories refused to be silenced. Printed violation notices flapped in the warm afternoon breeze, the paper corners smacking against vendor tents like warning flags. Margaret Hale and her committee moved with stiff precision, taping them onto every booth, lemonade stand, drum stage, and food truck alike. The sound of tape peeling and snapping echoed through the street, replacing the laughter that had filled it moments earlier. Mothers gathered their children closer. Vendors exchanged uncertain glances, hands hovering over cash boxes and trays of food. What had been a celebration was now a scene of quiet anxiety. "This is unacceptable," Margaret announced, adjusting her sunglasses as though they were armor. "Every one of these stands is out of compliance with HOA regulations." She held up a binder thick with highlighted pages, flipping to a section and reading aloud in clipped tones. "Article 12, subsection 5, all gatherings exceeding 50 participants must be pre-approved by the board and compliant with updated zoning ordinances." She looked up, her voice laced with condescension. You didn't file that, did you, Mr. Carter? Elias stood still, a steady figure in the growing storm. Ma'am, this festival has been approved by the township for years. It's part of our annual heritage program. Margaret's smile was tight, her tone turning syrupy. Township approval doesn't override HOA jurisdiction. You see, we have higher standards here. We're protecting the community's image. Her words dripped with the kind of civility that cut deeper than shouting ever could. Around her, a few newer residents nodded. Clean cut, recently moved in, clutching their HOA handbooks like Bibles. Rules are rules, one of them muttered. Can't make exceptions. From the crowd, an older man barked back, exceptions? This festival built this neighborhood? You're standing on its history. A woman with silver hair stepped forward, trembling but firm. These kids dance on the same street our grandparents laid brick on. That's not noise, and that's legacy. But the HOA didn't budge. Margaret's expression sharpened. Call the police, she instructed one of her board members quietly. Phones lifted again, recording everything. A dispatcher's voice crackled faintly through the speaker. A noise complaint and unauthorized event. Within minutes, 2 officers approached the festival's edge. Their presence alone was enough to change the air. The drums sat silent. Children clung to their parents. A food vendor shut off his grill. The camera of the moment narrowed, eyes darting, hands trembling. The unspoken question hanging in the air. Would they actually shut it down? Margaret saw her chance. She stepped to the center, phone camera in hand, speaking loudly enough for everyone, and every live stream viewer, to hear. This man, she declared, pointing at Elias, has no documented right to host this festival. He's violating our laws, disturbing the peace, and putting this entire neighborhood at risk. A hush fell. The lens of dozens of phones turned toward Elias. Comments flooded live feeds, some defending him, others echoing Margaret's authority. The weight of being recorded, of being tried in real time, pressed against him. Elias didn't flinch. He lifted a hand gently, signaling calm. Let them speak, he said, voice steady as water. Truth doesn't rush. His restraint disarmed the moment. Even the police hesitated. Margaret blinked, uncertain for the first time. Then came the final blow, the petition. Another HOA member stepped forward with a clipboard, a stack of signatures rustling in the wind. We've already gathered the majority vote to end this festival permanently, she announced proudly. It's time for modernization. Time to move forward. Elias looked at the papers. Hundreds of names, some neighbors he'd known since childhood, others who'd only moved in months ago. His eyes softened, not in defeat, but in understanding. He took a slow breath. So that's what this is about, he murmured. Erasing what doesn't fit your picture of progress. Margaret straightened her posture, voice triumphant. Exactly. This tradition ends today. The words hung heavy in the thick summer air. Elias's gaze swept across the crowd, the elders, the children, the officers unsure of their footing. Then he stepped forward, his tone calm, almost gentle, yet carrying a quiet authority that silenced even the cameras. Then, he said softly, it's time you know whose land you're standing on. The camera of the story would linger there, faces frozen, eyes narrowing, attention electric enough to hum. The drums waited, the wind paused, and for the first time, Margaret's certainty began to tremble. Elias stood motionless as the crowd closed in, the silence pressing against the air like the pause before a storm breaks. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the small wooden stage at the heart of the street, the one where the drums had once thundered and children had danced. The people parted for him instinctively, their whispers fading into awe. In his hands he carried a weathered wooden box, its hinges rusted, corners softened by time. Carved faintly across the lid were the words, Carter Estate 1923. Each step he took felt deliberate, as though he were walking not just through a crowd but through history itself. When he reached the stage, he set the box on a folding table that trembled slightly under its weight. The cameras zoomed in, phones lifted higher. Even the police stood still. Elias's voice carried across the square, low, steady, and unshaken. You want to talk about authorization? He said. Then let's talk about who authorized this festival in the first place. He unlatched the box. Inside, wrapped in aged linen and tied with a ribbon the color of faded ink, lay a document yellowed by decades. He lifted it gently, unfolding the parchment for everyone to see. "This," he said, "is the original charter of the Carter Cultural Festival, signed and notarized by the Eastbridge Township Council in 1923. The wind caught the paper's edges, fluttering it like the wings of something ancient. A hush fell over the crowd as he read aloud. "This document hereby grants perpetual annual rights to the descendants of Samuel Carter, founder of Eastbridge Township, to host the Carter Heritage Festival on this land. Commemoration of its original builders." Gasps rippled through the crowd. An elderly man covered his mouth. Police officer stepped closer, taking the paper from Elias with careful hands. He looked it over, tracing the seal with his thumb, then turned it toward the light. "It's authentic," the officer said quietly. Another younger officer nodded. "There's a state notary mark. This is real." Across the street, a city clerk who had been live-streaming the confrontation pulled out her own phone and confirmed the document through a public records search. Her voice trembled as she read it aloud for her viewers. "The Carter Heritage Charter. Still legally recognized." The sound of clicking phones filled the air. Live-stream captions began to flash across screens. "HOA tried to cancel. Historic Black Festival. Turns out it's legally protected." One man just reminded them who really owns the story. The HOA board members looked as though the ground beneath them had shifted. Margaret Hale's confident posture broke. The binder in her hand lowered, her voice shrinking into uncertainty. We weren't aware," she muttered. Elias looked at her, calm and unshaken. "You were told," he said softly. "You just never listened." The words carried no anger, only truth, a kind that left no room for defense. Margaret's lips parted, but no sound came. Behind her, the crowd began to stir again. Someone struck the first drum beat. Another joined in, then another. Rhythms that had been silenced only minutes ago rose again, deep and full, echoing between the houses. The sound built like a tide, steady, unstoppable, alive. Margaret stepped back as the music swelled. Police lowered their hands, exchanging small, knowing smiles. The festival lights flickered back on, bathing the street in gold. The camera of the story would linger here, on Elias, standing still amid the returning heartbeat of his people. The box beside him, open, its parchment glowing softly under the lanterns. Around him, the community reclaimed the space, cheering, drumming, laughing once more. The sound was not of rebellion, but of return. The sound of history refusing to vanish. As dusk settled over Eastbridge, the tension that had gripped the street began to melt into something softer. The police officers who had once stood as silent witnesses now stepped forward, removing the bright orange citations from the vendor booths. Their gestures were deliberate, almost apologetic. The tape that had bound the notices fluttered to the ground, caught briefly in the glow of the lanterns before the wind carried them away. The HOA members lowered their phones, their once stiff postures dissolving into uneasy stillness. The music that had been silenced slowly returned. First the quiet rhythm of a hand drum, then a trumpet joining from the far end of the block. Within minutes, the air filled with melody again. Not triumphant, but dignified. The crowd didn't cheer. They simply stood, letting the sound reclaim the space that authority had tried to empty. Under the soft amber light, faces glowed, proud, weary, and unbroken. Elias didn't stand at the center like a victor. He moved through the crowd quietly, greeting people one by one. Some of the neighbors who had signed the petition approached with hesitant steps, their expressions weighed with guilt. A man in a crisp polo shirt cleared his throat. "I didn't know, Elias. I thought it was just a block party." "I didn't," Elias cut him off gently. "It's all right. Now you do." His voice carried no resentment. "Stay, eat, learn what these songs mean. They tell the story better than I ever could." Others joined in, some helping vendors reopen stalls, others returning chairs and food trays that had been hastily packed away. The rhythm of normalcy, not forced but restored, spread across the street like slow-moving sunlight after rain. At the edge of the crowd, Margaret Hale stood alone. Her binder hung limp at her side, pages curling. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled into the microphone she had used hours earlier to condemn. "I acted without understanding the roots that built this neighborhood," she said. "I thought I was protecting order, but I see now I was silencing history." No one applauded. The silence that followed was heavier than anger. the kind that demands reflection, not punishment. Margaret lowered her eyes, and for once she didn't try to defend herself. Elias felt a soft touch on his arm. His aunt, Mrs. Lorna Carter, frail but sharp-eyed, stood beside him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They tried to erase us," she said, "but you made them remember." He looked down at her, a quiet smile in his eyes. "We all did, Aunt Lorna," he replied. "We just reminded them what never left." Nearby, children began to dance, their laughter cutting through the weight that hung in the air. On the stage, beneath the strings of lanterns, the original Carter Charter had been framed and placed upright beside the drums. The gold seal gleamed faintly against the wooden frame, a small but powerful symbol of continuity. The camera of the story would linger there, on the faces illuminated by light and legacy, on the music carrying into the night, on a community made whole by truth instead of victory. Some roots grow through stone, some truths outlive power. Heritage doesn't ask permission, it simply endures. If this story touched you, share what your community still fights to keep alive.